For 50 years, Kaw Valley Bicycle Club has been a staple of the Northeast Kansas cycling community. Founded in 1971 as the Topeka Wheelman by a handful of enthusiasts on 10-speed bicycles, the club now has over 190 members and offers sanctioned club rides on nearly every day of the week during the summer months, with several of these rides continuing on into the winter. Why has this organization continued to flourish, while other cycling groups have come and gone? And what are the challenges to come? To answer these questions, we will hear from board members and past presidents about their experiences and their vision for the future of the organization. But first, some club history. The three main organizers in 1971 were Phil Menninger, Carl Hummel, and Gene Wansing. Carl was the mechanic at Stevens Cycle, the local Schwinn dealer in Topeka. Customers would often ask if there were any organized rides in town. The owner of the bike shop, Sarah Stevens, checked with Gene Wansing, who was with the City Parks Department. Gene's boss knew Phil Menninger and introduced him to Gene. Shortly after, Phil, Carl, and Gene met to discuss forming a cycling club.
And we had our first meeting in my apartment after I got off work, number 11 at 21st and 21st and McVicker. And the three of us talked for a while and decided it's a go ahead, we need to go ahead and start this club. So we made up a news release and posted those around town for April the 22nd of 1971 at Crestview Community Center. And 10 decided to join that first night. And so we were off and running as the Topeka Wheelman.
Phil Menninger was elected president and Gene Wansing vice president. In May of that year, 43 cyclists rode from the State House to Gage Park on the first club ride. At the park, Carl gave the assembled riders a brief talk about common bicycle repairs. Bylaws were adopted in June of 1971, and by July, the club had quickly grown to 107 members. To promote the group, club patches were ordered, and when they arrived, the name read Topeka Wheelmen instead of Wheelmen. But the patches sold out anyway. The purpose of the club was to promote bicycle rides as social and fitness events. Early emphasis was on awarding patches to completers of major rides as an incentive to participate. Again, this followed the League of American Wheelmen model of awarding patches for events. Another early goal of the club was to sponsor racing. Founding member Gene Wansing, who would become president in 1974, recalls that the logistics of holding races had its challenges.
Since very few members were involved in racing, it was felt through the board at the time that it would be difficult to sponsor races if we didn't have persons to work the races. A lot of different events where our members would volunteer to work as corner marshals or registration, of course the Tin Man triathlon. But when you get into racing, you have registration, licensing, approvals. We were always concerned with safety, even on our very casual rides. And some motorists just did not understand that you were stopping them so the guys could ride through on bicycles. And we'd been very fortunate for many, many years. Over the last 10 to 20 years, we've had a couple of fatalities on organized rides and or races. That was one of Phil Menninger's concerns all along.
Problems surrounding racing events led the board of directors to reevaluate the core values of the club. In 1974, Jerry Morgan joined the group and recalls this as a turning point.
That was one of the statements that was made when I first joined from Phil Menninger and Gene Wansing and Carl Hummel, is that each year, each spring, over the winter, the club would just fall apart. And if you would have a race event, the race people didn't want to be on the race corners. They didn't want to sign the people in. They wanted to concentrate on racing because it was personal achievement. Do we want to have a club that races bicycles, or do we want to have a club that's involved in activities to to promote, social events and small rides out to the park and back in an evening. And you still see that going on today, which I'm really pleased at.
In 1975, Jerry Morgan was elected president. And to clarify the nature of the club as a non-racing entity, the name was changed to Kaw Valley Bicycle Touring Club. Also, a new logo and patch were designed.
To let the public know exactly what we were doing. We were a group of people that was just out touring. We weren't competitiveness. They felt like that the League of American Wheelmen, I'm not going to go because I'm not a wheelman. We wanted to say, hey, you want to go on a bicycle ride? You want to go on a little tour? And one of the things we soon learned is we would have people show up if we had food. I've learned that in a lot of organizations. Anytime you have an event and provide food, even if everybody brings their own food to help put the event on, people will show up.
1975 also saw the beginning of what would become a yearly ride tradition for the next 46 years to the present. A national organization called Bicentennial, now known as Adventure Cycling, was encouraging local bike clubs to sponsor a 200-mile ride for the 1976 bicentennial year. What we now know as the Cottonwood 200 started out as a ride on the 4th of July in 1975 from Topeka to Council Grove. It was a test run for the bicentennial ride the following year. Registration for the ride was listed in the newsletter at $2. But it turned out that July was not the best time to be on a bike all day in the Kansas sun. So the 200-mile ride in 1976 was moved to Memorial Day in May to take advantage of more favorable weather and to also enjoy the beauty of the newly green Flint Hills. The ride was dubbed the 1976 Cottonwood Falls Bicentennial Tour. Jerry Morgan stayed on as president in 1976, and he helped in designing new club jerseys and also wrote the Articles of Incorporation for KVBTC as a nonprofit organization. This was at the urging of Phil Menninger, who was concerned that liability issues might put club members at risk. In 1977, Rich Farr would become president, and the bicentennial ride was rebranded as the Cottonwood 200. There would be a new club president for each year for the next 22 years. Bill Roy joined the club in 1976 as a 22-year-old first-year law student at Washburn University, and recalls that the Cottonwood 200 continued to gain popularity with added features in 1978, including a Saturday dinner and a Sunday lunch. To cover costs, registration was increased to $6. As in previous years, the overnight stay was at a campground on the east side of the Council Grove Reservoir. The following year, the campsite was moved to the west side of the lake, where it stayed for the next 14 years. In 1979, Bill became president, with an eye on expanding the ride schedule and adding more fun events.
One that I kind of missed that was really a fun event every fall, we did a progressive dinner run. You'd go out and you'd have appetizers, one person, salad, another, and soup, and the main course and dessert. It did be 3, 4, 5, 6 stops over a Sunday, generally. I was going to say we also expanded the ride schedule. There's more rides now, but it was always a matter of increasing membership, increasing riding opportunities. What I do remember is we grew the membership pretty well. We were probably getting up toward 200 members in the club. It was during that time we were hitting 50 or 60 people. Also for the Cottonwood 200, which at the time felt like a pretty big crowd.
After serving as president, Bill Roy, Ron Alexander, and John Richter would start a progressive century ride in 1983. Originating from the parking lot at the law school on the Washburn campus, it was a 3-loop route giving riders the opportunity to do a 25-mile loop that was a quarter century, then a 37-mile loop that would make a metric century of 62 miles, and with the final loop of 38 miles to complete a century. The advantage of the looped rides was so that all club members could participate, regardless of fitness level, and the ride could be held without providing sag stops, since the loops returned to the same spot.
And then in 1984 is when it became the Capital Classic. Immediately became the Capital Classic. John Carlin was governor, and Ron Alexander was with some state agency, also in the bicycle club, as was John, and John Richter was the Secretary of State's office. But they were looking for events in kind of a fitness weekend around the Capitol. They took the idea of what had been really a spring loop century in 1983, and we just put it right into the Governor's Fitness Fair. And there was a t-shirt, and it was called the Capitol Classic.
From there, the Capitol Classic would start on the state Capitol grounds until 9/11, when access to the Capitol became restricted. In later years, the Capitol Classic would start in early May, across the street at the Judicial Center parking lot and various other locations. It became considered the warm-up ride for the Cottonwood 200 held at the end of May on Memorial Day. The Cottonwood 200 would ebb and flow with rider numbers every year. But by 1992, the ride was struggling, with less than 30 riders attending. Mark Kostler, who had ridden his first Cottonwood 200 at that time, remembers a watershed moment for the Cottonwood that would help the ride become more popular.
And the ride had a major change in 1993. We had a very wet spring. The Corps of Engineers was having to hold water back, and what was the campground was now underwater. And John Long, who was organizing the ride that year, made a desperate call to the local school district and said, "Hey, can we stay at the high school?" And they said, "Certainly." And that was not only a stroke of good luck, but it was the best stroke of good fortune. Now we were having the riders stay within a block of the main street of Council Grove. So it made it a much more enjoyable ride, that you could finish the ride, go get cleaned up at the high school, and then walk around downtown. That's one of the reasons the ride grew, was that more people enjoyed being able to stay inside, having access to hot showers, and being out of the weather.
In 1993, ride leader John Long again reserved the Council Grove High School gym, which became the new home for the Cottonwood. In 1994, Mark took charge as ride leader and would continue in that role for the next 22 years. From the beginning, Mark saw room for improvement.
And my goal when I started organizing it was, I was doing rides myself, was doing the BAK, had done the Cottonwood, had done the Capitol Classic, and had done rides in other states, and thought, you know, we can improve this ride. Simple things like trying to make the sag stops better, trying to have more things for the riders to do. And each year, we were successful in being able to attract a few more riders. To me, the heart of the club is the volunteers. Everybody loves to ride, and when it's a simple weekly ride and people just show up and ride together, that's the great social thing about riding. But the organized rides, to figure out what the route's going to be and how you're going to have a sag stop and what items you're going to have for it, takes some volunteer time. If you're driven, you can do a lot by yourself, but you can burn out if you don't get enough volunteers. And I have found with the club, most people will help if asked, but you have to ask them person to person. Rides like that take a huge amount of volunteers, and often you have to call them up or talk to them individually. And that's when the club is successful, because the more great rides we can put on, the more people say, "Hey, I want to be part of that." That's how we have a great club.
Mark would also lead the club as president in 1995, and it was at this time that the club changed the name to Kaw Valley Bicycle Club.
It was interesting, folks were getting hung up on the touring part of the name. The issue is that folks thought, well, touring, that means, gee, that means you're getting your bike and putting your panniers on and riding across the country all the time. You know, it just made sense to shorten it up and make it easier for everybody to understand that we were about bicycles.